If you saw a brutal crime being committed on a crowded street, what would you do? Rush to help? Wait for someone else to make the first move? Thankfully, most of us will never have to face such a terrifying test. But unfortunately, many who have failed. Here's Dennis Murphy.
She hit this guy's car, just a bender. And he went to his truck and got a crowbar and started beating her car.
It happened to Dortha Word's daughter, Delitha, at 2 in the morning on a weekend last August. She was headed home after a summer night spin through Belle Isle, Detroit's popular island park, when she sideswiped a car and didn't stop. Moments later, she got stuck in traffic coming across the bridge that connects Belle Isle with Detroit. The man whose car she hit caught up with her.
He started beating her and telling her, look what she did to his car.
The young man, a 6'4", 270-pound former high school football player, was in a rage. According to police accounts, he pulled Delitha from her car, stripped her nearly naked, and began beating her savagely on this bridge. Delitha, not 5 feet tall, escaped her attacker twice, and twice he caught her. She broke away once more and climbed over the side of the bridge, clinging to the railing for her life. But when her attacker came at her again, this time swinging a car jack, Delitha let go, falling 30 feet into the Detroit River.
She couldn't swim, no.
2 men drove up after Delitha jumped and dove into the water to try to save her.
We got a female on the water that hasn't come up yet.
She disappeared under the swift current. Her body was found the next morning. And what grieves and angers Dortha Word, even as much as her daughter's death, is that dozens of people stood by and watched as the attack went on for 25 minutes, and no one tried to help, or even to call police, until Delitha was in the river. Some of the bystanders had cell phones, and there was a police station just at the end of the bridge.
The reason we know, Miss Word, what happened on that bridge, because there were people there watching, weren't there?
Yes.
People saw every bit of it.
Yes.
Cars were stopped, people got out of their cars?
Yes. I can't believe it.
It's something I have to live with for the rest of my life.
Harvey Mayberry was one of the dozens of bystanders that terrible night on the Belle Isle Bridge.
What was going on?
He body slammed her to the concrete, he choked her, he hit her. You name it, he just practically did it.
Mayberry and the others watched as the attacker held Delitha out to the crowd and asked if any of them wanted a piece of her.
Did you feel like you were watching a movie, maybe?
A horror.
That crowd would become notorious nationwide as the bystanders, the incomprehensible bystanders who watched and did nothing as a young woman suffered a horrific death.
How could you just stand by, idly by, and watch somebody beat somebody like this and beat them, and you don't do anything? You don't even try to stop them. I mean, 35 or 40 people could have rushed him. They didn't even try to do that.
I would never forget that night. I mean, and I'm always wonder, what if I'd have done this, if I'd have done that.
But he did nothing, and neither did bystanders in a frightening litany of recent incidents. In Washington, D.C., 4 construction workers watched as a woman was mugged. In Los Angeles, 30 bus passengers just sat in their seats as their driver was beaten senseless. And in Virginia, 6 people stood by as a store clerk was badly beaten and left bleeding in a corner. No one even called police. When you hear tragic stories like Delitha Word's and countless others like it, you might ask yourself, how could those people be so inhuman? And you might say to yourself, well, if I'd been there, surely I would have stepped in and done something. But would you? University researchers have been asking exactly that question now for decades. And what they found out about bystanders, like those people on the bridge, could cause you to disregard forever that old adage, there's safety in numbers.
There's trouble in numbers. People tend to freeze each other and cause each other not to respond.
Princeton psychology professor John Darley was inspired to run a series of experiments on bystanders by something that happened nearly 30 years ago. Another notorious case of inaction. The murder of a young New York woman, Kitty Genovese. Genovese screamed for help repeatedly during the 35-minute stabbing, but no help came, even though more than 36 neighbors heard her cries from their apartments. The public was horrified, but Professor Darley says they shouldn't have been surprised.
We see these incidents on television, John, and we say we're not that spineless person.
You're exactly right. That's what we say. We mustn't keep coming to that conclusion. We have to think about the uncomfortable fact, the uncomfortable truth, that I might not help.
Darley says there is something else, something more than fear of getting hurt or involved that governs our responses. There's inaction in numbers. The more people who hear or see someone in trouble, the less likely that any individual will help.
The person who crumbles to the sidewalk with a heart attack, are they better off having one person there or 3 or 4 people seeing them?
I'm afraid they're better off having one person there, because if one person is there, that one person knows if this person is going to get help, it has to come from me. This is all pretty standard stuff.
To demonstrate his findings that people react differently in groups than alone, Dr. Darley and his colleague Jeff Stone put some students to the bystander test. They were brought into a video lab room under the guise of watching a tape and commenting on it. They'd be paid $10 for evaluating the tape.
So that's sort of how this whole thing's set up.
As the students arrived, they were walked past a man posing as a maintenance worker. 5 minutes into the videotape, the students would hear what seemed to be the man falling from his ladder and moaning, out of view around the corner. Our hidden cameras watched to see how they'd respond. At first, there's just one test subject behind our one-way mirror.
Whoa!
I heard this sort of cry or a groan, and I decided that it was definitely something that needed to be investigated.
Very common single-person reaction.
Single person reaction. Nobody else. I gotta move.
Another student, another crash. The student has to evaluate what he's hearing and decide to help or not.
Notice the poker face. Isn't that marvelous? He's helping me. He turned off the tape so he can go back and start the tape where it was while he's helping.
What made you decide to act, to intervene?
The fact that I was the only one there, I had to do something.
Again and again in his research, Darley found that the overwhelming majority of people, when alone, help.
He didn't answer when I asked him if he was okay, so I ran out. And at that point, I was really scared. I thought about what I'd do, and I thought I'd scream 911.
But adding passive bystanders to the mix drastically altered the results. Watch what happens when Dr. Darley plants 2 people in the room, people who've been instructed not to react when they hear the crash.
I thought, man, no matter how many people are in here, somebody's got to get up and go and check.
The 2 men instructed not to react are on the left and right of the picture. So what happens to the man in the middle? As instructed, the Confederates look up, then go back to watching the videotape. The subject glances around, then goes back to his work, as the moans continue for 14 seconds.
Emmanuel, did your brain tell you, here's a guy in trouble?
Yes.
You didn't get up?
No, I didn't get up.
Why didn't you intervene, do you think?
Because of the 2 people on my sides. They did not react at all, so I figured they must know something that I don't know.
The group dynamic kicked in. Even though there was no danger if a person answered the call for help, time after time the subject sat frozen when flanked by others who did not react.
To go against the group is to say, all of you are wrong and I am right. And that's a hard thing for people to do.
Watch his reaction. He seems to look to the others to help him evaluate what's going on. He doesn't budge.
Now I know that I would be one of those people who you watch disgustedly on the news and say, why didn't they do anything? Thinking about it afterward kind of makes you feel like a sheep. You just feel like you're controlled by what other people do and you don't really have too much control over what you think or what you do.
And that, according to Darley, is exactly what happens in most cases. People take their cues from those around them to decide how to act. If they're surrounded by poker faces, they are more likely not to respond.
What makes some of us heroes and some of us sheep?
More than we would like to think, coincidence, I'm afraid. If many other people are not acting, if my confusion, my puzzlement overwhelm me, then I'm less likely to act. Within me, there's the hero. Within me, there's the non-responding bystander.
Also at play is a natural response psychologists call diffusion of responsibility. We tell ourselves that someone else will probably help and will probably handle it better than we would. And not the least of it is the fear of making a fool of ourselves.
We're stepping on stage not knowing our lines. We may embarrass ourselves, and we are intruding in a situation in which we may embarrass the people we intrude in.
Are you okay?
Dr. Darley says people alone help 80% of the time, but people in groups only 20% of the time, which means only about 1 in 5 of us would react as David Brown did, as he breaks the force field of the strangers around him.
Whoa! The crash, 2 Confederates notice. You can't help but notice. He hears it, looks, and it's almost as if he's looking at a wall. And he was clearly coping with, they're not acting. They're telling me there's no trouble here, and dealing with that.
Sometimes what everybody else is doing is not necessarily the right thing, so you have to just kind of ignore it and do whatever you think is right.
Good advice, but a highly unusual reaction. Dead opposite of what most of us do when we're just another face in the crowd. So what should we do if we get in trouble?
If we find ourselves the victim, if we are the person on the sidewalk with a heart attack, and we see the people out there who might help, but their faces are just frozen like pottery, what do we do?
Let's make clear that there's no ambiguity about what's happening. I'm saying I'm the victim. I really need help. Everybody, I really need help. And you, Mr. You, I'm looking you in the eyes. Will you please do whatever?
Pick a face out of the crowd?
Pick a face out of the crowd. That person knows the responsibility rests with him, with her.
Dr. Darley says that just one person stepping forward in a crowd can transform the group from passive to active.
The thing that haunts us, I suspect, is that might have happened on the Detroit Bridge.
It is a question that haunts Harvey Mayberry every day.
For the rest of my life, I'm going to have to deal with that. If I had done this, then maybe she'd still be here.
But it took one person to step forward still, and nobody did.
Nobody did. But I honestly believe if one person had to step forward, because I know I would have, but to be the first one, no.
We can all find ourselves on that bridge, and we could all find ourselves not responding. But if we understand why that might be so, we are more likely to be freed to respond.